Elise, with whom I had lived for 9 years, and I were reading the news on our tablets after finishing our Saturday morning breakfast when the doorbell rang. Elise jumped slightly in surprise. I had noticed that she had been a bit nervous and restless over the past week or so, and her anxiety had led to some very good intimacy between us, much better than the boring, uninspired intimacy we'd had for the previous 6 months. "I'll get it," I said, placing my iPad on the table and heading to the door. When I opened it, I saw 2 men showing badges that identified them as police officers. "Good morning. How can I help you?" I asked. "Are you Mr. Brian Campbell?" asked the larger one. I nodded. "We're Officers Stevens and Peters from the Austin Police Department, sir. We are here to execute a search warrant," he said, handing me a packet of documents. "A search warrant?" I exclaimed in confusion. "For what?" "Sir, everything is described in the warrant. We'll give you a few minutes to read it. You can also contact your lawyer if you feel it's necessary. We'd also like to speak with your wife, Elise Campbell, if she's available." "She's in the kitchen," I said, leading the 2 officers into the hallway. I read through the warrant and discovered that it was indeed issued for my wife, Elise, specifically regarding any firearms she might possess and any property that might belong to a Mr. Conrad O'Brien. Returning to the kitchen with the police officers, I asked, "Is this somehow related to that rich guy who was found dead last week? My wife works for one of his companies, but we don't know him. I've never even met the guy." As I said this, I looked up and saw that my wife's face had turned pale, and her eyes were wide with shock. If they were looking for a guilty face, they didn't need to look any further. "Elise, do you know what this is about?" "They have a warrant to search our house, and it implies that you're somehow connected to Conrad O'Brien's murder," I said, irritation creeping into my voice. "Sir, please allow us to ask the questions. Could you sit somewhere outside of the kitchen? We have a few questions we'd like to ask Mrs. Campbell," one of the officers said. "Is she under arrest?" I asked. I really think she should speak to a lawyer before answering a bunch of questions. "Elise, do you want me to call my lawyer and see if he can find someone to represent you?" "Yes, please," Elise said quietly, tears beginning to well up in the corners of her eyes. "That's certainly her right," one of the police officers said. "Why don't we schedule an interview for next week? Right now, we're just gathering evidence, and no one is under arrest. In fact, we'd also like to have a conversation with you, Mr. Campbell. We can do that at the station at the same time as your wife's interview. Of course, you have the right to legal representation during the interview if you wish. One more question, sir. Do you have any firearms in the house that we should be aware of?" "First of all, I'm happy to talk to you here, not at the station. I've never met O'Brien, and I have nothing to hide. Secondly, yes, I have a few pistols, all of which are locked in my gun safe, except for one in the drawer of my bedside table. Could Officer Peters accompany you to retrieve the pistol from the bedside table, and then could you open your gun safe so we can take a look?" Understanding that I didn't have much of a choice and wanting to appear cooperative, I replied, "Of course, follow me. It's right this way," and led Officer Peters to the master bedroom. Once there, I pointed to my bedside table. "It's in the top drawer." Wearing gloves, Officer Peters opened the drawer and carefully removed my Taurus judge, using an evidence collection rod, and placed the pistol in a collection bag. "Your gun safe?" "Certainly. This way," I said, leading him to my office. Once inside, I entered the combination and opened the large, heavy door of the gun safe. "Sir, we're going to take all firearms to our lab for testing. Before we leave, we'll issue you a receipt for the items we confiscate. Once everything has been checked, your property will be returned." "All right," I said, realizing I had no other option. Peters spoke into a small microphone. "Michaels, I need you and your team to come here and start inventorying the owner's firearms." "Got it, boss. Be right there," I heard a voice respond from the speaker. Moments later, Michaels and his team were in my office with containers and bags, ready to inventory and collect the weapons. I glanced at Peters, who nodded and then cleared his throat. "All right, guys, we're here to search the premises for any items listed in the warrant. Specifically, we're looking for any additional firearms. Michaels will assign each of you a search area. Let's get to work." Over the next few hours, the team dispersed and thoroughly searched our house and the 2 cars we had parked in the garage. While they weren't destructive, the house was certainly in disarray by the time the search was complete. We waited about 10 minutes while the forensic team and the 2 officers conferred near their cars. I kept looking at Elise, giving her my best, "What the hell is going on?" "Look." Then Officer Peters knocked on the door. I opened it, and he handed me a receipt, thanking me for cooperating with the search. As if I had a choice. I nodded, glancing over the receipt and noting that all they had taken were firearms, 5 long rifles and 4 pistols. He asked if he could speak with Mrs. Campbell, and I once again led him into our home. Elise was still sitting at the kitchen table, her head down, and it looked like she had been crying. The officer gently asked, "Mrs. Campbell?" She looked up, and he handed her a copy of his business card, instructing her to arrange an interview at the station later in the week, once her lawyer was available. She nodded and said, "All right." Then he asked if he and his partner could have a conversation with me in my office and informed me that I had the right to an attorney if I wanted one. I said I didn't need one since I'd never met O'Brien and had nothing to hide. The interview was thorough, but lasted less than an hour, as I had never even met O'Brien. They wanted to know if I had any grievances against this fool who apparently had been sleeping with my wife, and they also wanted to check my alibi. They asked about my whereabouts on the night O'Brien was killed. I asked which night it was, and they gave me the date. I pulled out my iPhone and looked at my calendar. I was at my friend Lee Rogers' house that night. Elise told me she was going to stay over at her aunt's in Fredericksburg, so I called Lee, and he invited me over. I explained. When they asked what we did, I said we had dinner with Lee's wife, Pat. After dinner, we chatted for a bit, and then Lee took me up in his private plane since he's an avid pilot. I explained that in his neighborhood, at Breakaway Park in Cedar Park, there's a private airstrip, and many of the residents, including Lee, have their own planes and hangars. It turned out the officers were familiar with the area. I told them we took off around 8 p.m. and returned about an hour later. They asked who piloted the plane, and I said that I wasn't the pilot, but Lee had served as a military pilot for many years, so I felt perfectly safe flying with him. They mentioned they might need to verify my story, so I gave them Lee's full name, address, and phone number. Later, I talked to Lee and learned that the police had interviewed both him and Pat at their home, and they both confirmed my story. They also provided the police with surveillance footage they got from their HOA. The footage was from a camera aimed at the airstrip, showing planes taking off and landing. The video confirmed that Lee's plane took off at 8:05 p.m. and returned at 9:15 p.m. The police thanked me for my cooperation and left. I returned to the kitchen and spoke to my wife. "What the hell does all this mean? You work at one of his companies, but I never thought you had anything to do with that scumbag O'Brien. What the hell is going on, Elise? Were you having an affair with that idiot?" She looked up at me, her lower lip trembling, tears streaming down her face. She whimpered, "I'm so sorry," then jumped up from her seat and rushed to our bedroom, locking the door behind her. The following week was chaotic. Local news channels got wind of the search warrant and hounded both Elise and me for interviews or comments. Conrad O'Brien's murder was the top local story. We didn't say anything, just as her lawyer had instructed. My attorney referred Elise to Ted Walker, a local criminal defense lawyer. For some reason, Elise didn't want me present at the meeting she scheduled with Ted for Monday afternoon. Something was definitely wrong. O'Brien had made millions developing software and online projects. His companies had once employed over 1,000 people locally, but a few years ago, he outsourced most of his development work to India to cut costs. Nonetheless, he frequently made headlines, often for charitable donations, and he still employed quite a few people, including Elise. However, there were rumors that old Conrad was a womanizer, particularly fond of betting attractive married women. Walker arranged for Elise to meet with the police at 9:30 a.m. on Friday. She told me that Ted believed the police were just fishing for information and doubted anything substantial would come of it. Well, Ted couldn't have been more wrong. Around 11:30 a.m. on Friday, I received a call from a distraught Elise, informing me that after the interview, the police had arrested her and charged her with the murder of Conrad O'Brien. She was taken into custody and placed in the women's jail downtown, with a bail hearing set for the following Monday. I asked if I could attend the bail hearing, but I was told it was closed to the public. Late Monday evening, Elise called me, and it sounded like she had been crying. She said her bail had been set at $500,000 and asked if I could post it for her. Since I had never been involved with the criminal justice system before, I Googled bail and found out that a bail bondsman typically charges a non-refundable fee of 10% of the bail amount. Damn, that's $50,000 we'd never get back. A few years ago, I had started a successful recruiting business, and we were doing well financially. But still, $50,000 was a lot of money. I told her that before I handed over that kind of cash, I wanted to meet with her, and she needed to be completely honest with me about what was going on. She agreed. I suppose she didn't have much choice if she wanted my cooperation. Walker set up a meeting for us in the jail's interrogation room and said he'd be there to explain everything. I arrived at the jail, where they checked me to make sure I wasn't carrying any contraband or weapons, and then I was led to the interrogation room usually used by defendants and their attorneys. Walker and Elise were already in the room, and Elise was wearing an orange jumpsuit. It didn't look good on her at all. Instead of getting answers directly from Elise, Walker acted as her spokesperson. He said that I would likely find out the facts anyway, so he was prepared to tell me what I wanted to know. He revealed that Elise and O'Brien had been having an affair for about 6 months, which had only ended because of his death. I was stunned by this revelation and glared at Elise angrily. "You're a damn cheat. No wonder sex with you was so damn boring until that jerk died. He was using you, wasn't he, you liar?" Elise sat there shocked and devastated by my outburst, her head bowed, crying. Walker said he understood how upsetting this news was for me and asked if I could take a few minutes to calm down. He said that despite the affair, he was certain Elise didn't kill O'Brien. "Really?" I asked. "If you're so damn sure, then why did they arrest her for his murder?" "They must have some pretty solid evidence against her." Walker went on to explain that the murder took place at O'Brien's 300-hectare ranch, located in the Texas Hill Country, west of Austin. The house on the ranch was a mini-mansion, smaller than O'Brien's luxurious home on Lake Austin, but still a 2-story, 450-square-meter residence with a pool and tennis court. The house was equipped with exterior security cameras, with night vision that captured any vehicle or pedestrian movement approaching the home from all sides. There were also interior cameras, but O'Brien only activated them when he was away. And indeed, these cameras were turned off when he was killed. Ted continued, explaining that the police had shown footage from the surveillance cameras, which captured O'Brien's Lamborghini driving up the driveway at 9 p.m. on the night he was murdered. The camera inside the house clearly recorded him entering the garage before he turned off the interior cameras. Around 10 p.m., the exterior surveillance cameras captured Elise's Lexus driving up the driveway and parking outside. The footage clearly shows Elise walking up to the front door and entering the house. I found the casual way she walked in just as unsettling as the rest of this messy situation. A few minutes later, the same camera recorded her hastily leaving the house and practically running to her car before quickly driving away. "Damn," I exclaimed. "It sure as hell looks like she did it." I looked at Elise and asked, "Did you really do it?" Her lawyer tried to stop her from answering, but she didn't listen to his advice. "No, I swear, I didn't do it. When I went inside, I saw him sitting in his chair. I could see his legs, but his back was to me. He didn't respond when I called out, so I thought he was asleep. When I walked around the chair and looked at him, he had a bullet hole in his forehead, right between his eyes, and his chest was covered in blood. I screamed, panicked, and ran back to my car. "I'm not sure why I should believe you," I said. "You've already admitted that you're a lying, deceitful crap who had an affair behind my back for 6 months while I was working hard to give you the kind of life most women would dream of. And I'm also not sure why I should fork over $50,000 to bail you out of this place." Walker tried to bring some much-needed calm and logic to the conversation. He explained that since we were in a community property state, half of our money belonged to Elise, and they could get those $50,000 with or without my help. In the end, I gave in and agreed to cooperate, but I made it clear to Elise that regardless of my cooperation, we were done. Walker remained optimistic that Elise could avoid charges, despite the fact that she had been at O'Brien's house and fled the scene without calling the police. Walker summarized the evidence gathered by the police. "The good news is that the ballistic analysis didn't match any of the guns from your home to the murder weapon. Unfortunately, the bad news is that the only people caught on O'Brien's surveillance cameras in the past week were O'Brien and Mrs. Campbell." The details of the case hit the media, and they turned our lives into a living hell. Reporters hounded us outside our home when we weren't there and even outside my office. Some of the questions made me look like a clueless cuckold. They asked if I knew about her affair with O'Brien, and so on. I guess I was a clueless cuckold. Once, I snapped back at the reporters, saying that I had never even met O'Brien and had no knowledge of any relationship between him and my wife. I certainly would never have allowed it if I had known. I kicked Elise out of our bedroom, and now she slept in the guest room and used the guest bathroom. She told me that Walker said we needed to appear as a united couple to avoid further damaging public opinion, which might affect potential jurors. Get lost, Elise. Now that your boyfriend's dead, you want to be a united couple. Where was this united attitude when you ditched me to sleep with that scumbag? You know, after hearing Walker lay out the prosecution's evidence, I'm convinced you did it. You're not just a sneaky cheater, you're a cold-blooded killer. I'm glad the state's keeping my firearms until this case is over. I don't trust you as far as I can throw your pathetic ass. I even installed a bolt on my bedroom door so you can't get to me while I'm sleeping." She looked at me with a shocked expression, at least that she was good at. The district attorney met with Walker and Elise several times, trying to negotiate a plea deal. They settled on a deal for manslaughter with a 2-year sentence, of which she would serve 1 year before becoming eligible for parole. Why such a lenient sentence? I guess the prosecution had major issues with proving up motive. Why would Elise need to kill O'Brien? He seemed to treat her well and gave her nice gifts. He even opened a secret bank account where he transferred money to her. When I found out about her secret account, I insisted she pay me back the $50,000 I had put up for her bail. They also had the issue of never being able to find the murder weapon, despite all their efforts. Though Elise maintained her innocence, Walker begged her to take the deal since all the evidence, except for the motive and murder weapon, was against her. And the plea deal was quite favorable. Why risk a jury convicting her of murder? The jury wasn't going to be sympathetic to a woman who had a 6-month affair, and the cameras clearly showed that only she and O'Brien were in the house. With tears in her eyes, she finally agreed. A week later, the judge approved the plea deal, ordering Elise to report to the women's prison in 2 weeks. As we left the courtroom, I handed her my divorce papers. Nothing feels better than hitting a cheater when she's down. The day before she was due to report to prison, Elise asked if I could sit down and talk with her. She disgusted me, and I really didn't want to speak with her, so I told her I'd talk if she agreed to sign the divorce papers afterward. She agreed, and I arranged for my lawyer to come to our house at 7 p.m. with a notary. The divorce was a standard 50-50 split, except she didn't get any share of my business, or any spousal support or maintenance, as it's called in Texas. The joint assets also included the $250,000 in her secret account, gifted to her by O'Brien. I didn't care that it was dirty money. It worked just like any other money and helped ensure she didn't cling to my assets. My lawyer and his notary will be here in an hour. After that, you'll agree to sign the papers, right? Yes, I'll sign the papers. Thank you for talking to me. I wanted to tell you that I'm really sorry for ever getting involved with Conrad. I was in a tough spot, and you were working a lot. We met at a cafe, and he charmed me. He made me feel better at a time when I was feeling miserable. But that's no excuse. I knew who he was, and I knew he owned the company I worked for. I had also heard rumors that he was a womanizer with a reputation for going after married women. I have to admit, I felt flattered that he pursued me. You're a beautiful woman, and I'd be surprised if he hadn't made a move on you, I said, to which she gave a small, appreciative smile at the compliment. I also wanted you to know that I never stopped loving you, even while I was seeing him. Even though I was sleeping with Conrad, I never truly loved him, and I knew our affair would end sooner or later. It sounds crazy, but I really thought I could have two men, at least for a while. My affair was never about you, and I wanted you to know that we never really talked about you. Early on, after we had finished, he tried to insult you, and I left instead of spending the night with him. I told him that if he ever said anything bad about you again, we were done. It was after that night that he opened the $250,000 account for me. Wow, I said. This sounds straight out of the Cheater's Handbook. Chapter on what to say when you get caught. You know most cheaters get caught eventually, and you knew I would never tolerate infidelity. What exactly did you think would happen when you got caught? I deserve that. I know you have strong morals. Believe it or not, that's one of the things that attracted me to you back in college. I knew you'd throw me out if you ever found out, but I guess every cheater thinks they're different and won't get caught. I think the risk of being caught is part of the thrill that makes the affair exciting. But of course, it wasn't worth it. Maybe I'm a cheater, but you and I both know I'm not a murderer. Tell me, Brian, did you kill Conrad or pay someone to have him killed? Nice try. Elise, Walker put you up to this, did he? Set you up to try to get a confession out of me. Her pale face told me I'd hit the mark. Tell me, dear wife, if I did it, how the hell would I have gotten there? You think Captain Kirk beamed me over in the Starship Enterprise? Face the facts. You saw the surveillance footage. It was just you and that jerk O'Brien at his house when a bullet put a hole in his head. Since we're on the topic, why don't you finally tell me why you did it? Was he going to dump you? Did you tell him you loved him? And he just laughed, saying you were just a good toy for sex. Go to hell, she growled. Thank God, never again, I snapped back. At that moment, the doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of my lawyer and his notary. I think this conversation is over. Time to end this miserable marriage, I said, stepping out of my office to open the door. For once, the lease kept her word and signed the divorce papers. In a few months, I'd be a free man, and my ex would be sitting in a medium-security state prison. I even played the gentleman and drove her to jail. Okay, let's be honest. I wanted to make sure that she was locked up and out of my life for good. 6 months later, I was at Lee's house, celebrating the finalization of my divorce, which had come in the mail earlier that week. We were sitting in his bar, drinking adult beverages, and Lee was smoking a fine cigar. Do you feel even a little guilty? I asked him. Lee gave me a sharp look. That bastard killed my younger sister. He had it coming. Maybe he didn't pull the trigger himself, but he seduced her, a married woman with 2 kids. When her husband found out about the affair and kicked her out, O'Brien dumped her and cut her off. Megan was so devastated that she'd rather take her own life than face the consequences. But we both know O'Brien was to blame. Lee had told me about O'Brien and his sister after her death. He had been heartbroken for weeks. I just nodded in response as Lee paused, taking a deep drag from his cigar. And what about you? Do you feel guilty that Elise went to prison for a crime she didn't commit? Not really. That stupid crap brought it on herself. She knew I'd burn her life to the ground if I ever found out she was cheating, but she did it anyway. And hell, I learned how to fly and land your plane. That was pretty cool. Plus, someone had to stop O'Brien from going after more married women and ruining more marriages. He caused too much damage. Unfortunately, it seems like our courts and legal system don't care about that. Sometimes morality and law just don't line up. You've got that right, brother, Lee said, tipping his long neck beer toward me. And we clinked bottles. We sat in silence for a while, enjoying the evening. Then I asked, "We've never really talked about it, but how tough was the operation for you? How did it feel to put a bullet between that scumbag's eyes?" "Recoil. That's what I felt," Lee said with a laugh. I knew Lee had served in special forces and probably killed plenty of bad guys, but this mission had been particularly tricky. After his sister's death, Lee had planned to kill O'Brien. His military training taught him to plan meticulously, and I had to admit, his plan was brilliant. I had known Lee for a few years, and we were good friends. We often went fishing and hunting together. He thoroughly scouted O'Brien's country house on the hill. Before she died, his sister had even told him that O'Brien always kept the exterior cameras on, but turned off the interior ones when he was home. That bit of information was crucial to his planning. I found out about my wife's affair shortly after it started. O'Brien had sent her a text, an innocent message, likely some code for their affair. Lee's sister, Megan, and Elise were connected through their work at one of O'Brien's companies. When I first told Lee about Elise's affair with O'Brien, it took him some time. But eventually, he convinced me to play the long game and not divorce her right away. While Lee was an experienced killer, I was practically useless in our operation, but we were in this together. Lee decided that my role would be to pilot his plane while he carried out the wet work. It took him several months to teach me how to fly and land his plane. It was fun, but deep down, I knew I was learning to fly just to help Lee kill O'Brien, and that sent a chill down my spine. We tracked Elise's movements using a GPS tracker on her car, and I had learned the passcode to unlock her phone. I often checked her messages to monitor her upcoming meetings with O'Brien. On the morning of the operation, Lee drove an old Jeep to a secluded spot about 2 kilometers from O'Brien's house and covered it with camouflage netting. He removed the plates and replaced them with ones taken from an abandoned car he had found. After hiding the Jeep, I picked him up and dropped him off at his house before returning home before noon. That evening, I went to Lee's, and we flew the plane, just like I told the police, except I was the one flying. Lee was dressed entirely in black, with black leather gloves, a balaclava covering his face, and night vision goggles. He looked terrifying. He had a military-style square black parachute, which he said was very maneuverable and would allow him to land on O'Brien's roof, or even better, on the second-floor balcony with a sliding door leading to an upstairs bedroom. O'Brien's master bedroom was downstairs. He also had a backpack strapped to his front, filled with tools and equipment for his escape. I piloted the small plane under Lee's direction until he felt we were in the perfect spot. Opening the plane door, he shouted, "Let's get this done, buddy," over the noise of the propeller, and jumped into the night sky. The conditions were ideal. Darkness, barely any moonlight, and calm winds, allowing Lee to make a perfect landing on the second-floor balcony. From his recon, he knew the cameras weren't pointed at the balcony. He picked the lock on the balcony door and waited there until O'Brien arrived and turned off the indoor surveillance cameras. Lee quietly entered the house and crept down the stairs. He told me that he wanted to have a conversation with O'Brien before shooting him. By tracking Elise's car with GPS, we knew she was still about an hour away. We didn't think there were any listening devices in the house, but Lee didn't want to take any chances, and in the end, he didn't care what O'Brien had to say. He found a spot where he could watch O'Brien and waited for him to sit down, as he didn't want his target to panic and run outside. Once the bastard sat in his chair, Lee appeared, pointing a gun at O'Brien's head. To say O'Brien was shocked and terrified would be an understatement. At first, Conrad thought he was the victim of a home invasion and quickly offered the masked man money and valuables. With the gun still aimed at O'Brien's head, Lee calmly approached him and whispered in his ear, "This is for Megan." Taking a step back, Lee saw the realization hit O'Brien, and he also noticed a large wet spot forming on O'Brien's pants. Then Lee pulled the trigger, ending O'Brien's pathetic life. Lee's escape gear was a dismantled ultralight hang glider, made with lightweight aluminum struts that fit together to support the nylon fabric of the wings. It took him about 10 minutes to assemble the glider. Since the exterior cameras were angled downward to catch intruders, Lee figured he only needed to fly about 100 meters away from the house to avoid detection. After making sure he packed all his gear, he stepped back onto the balcony and locked the door from the outside this time. He climbed from the balcony to the roof and used a rope he had tied to pull the assembled hang glider up onto the roof. Fortunately, the roof's slope was manageable, so he carefully climbed to the highest point with the glider. Feeling a light breeze on his face, he took a running start along the ridge of the roof and launched the glider. He told me he must have been pumped with adrenaline because he probably flew 500 meters before landing. Once on the ground, Lee disassembled the glider and made his way to the Jeep. He packed up his gear and drove off into the night. The next day, he disposed of the gun, the hang glider, and the black clothes he had worn. He even got rid of his shoes to avoid leaving any traces. Hearing Lee recall this part of the mission, I exclaimed, "Lee, you've been retired for over 10 years, but you've still got it." "Brian, I did it for my little sister. May she rest in peace. As Toby Keith once said, I ain't as good as I once was, but I'm as good once as I ever was." You're traveling through another dimension, a dimension not only of sight and sound but of mind. A journey into a wondrous land whose boundaries are those of imagination. That's the signpost up ahead. Your next stop. "Turn that off," screeched Lori, primping herself in the bathroom. "What the hell is the matter with you? God damn it. I work 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. This is the only day I have off, and I'll watch whatever I want," Randy yelled back from his recliner in the living room. "Well, I don't want to hear that crap again. You watch that stupid show every week. Hell, it isn't even in color." Lori walked into the living room, dressed to impress in a short skirt and a top that bared her midriff. It was clear she had made an effort, wearing a thong and high heels. "Wow, you look great. Where are we going tonight?" Randy asked. "We aren't going anywhere. I'm going on a girls' night out. I don't know when I'll be back, so don't wait up for me," she said, brushing past him. Randy felt a twinge of frustration. "What the hell is up with you? I hardly get to see you during the week, and the one day I'm home, you decide to go out. I deserve a day off too, you know," she replied. "You think it's easy keeping this place clean while you work. Yeah, I work a bit too. Maybe not 16 hours a day like you, but it's not easy for me either. And besides, you've been sick, remember?" "I know," Lori said, "but it must take a lot of effort to paint those toenails like that." "That's right," she huffed. "So I'm going out with the girls, and I'll be home whenever I want." "Just remember one thing, Lori," Randy said, stopping her before she walked out. "If I ever find out you're cheating on me, you won't have a home to come back to." "Whatever," she said, slamming the door behind her. Randy locked the door, set the deadbolt, put the chain on, and secured the door bolt he had just installed. She'd have a hard time getting back in, assuming she came back at all. He did the same to the back door and made sure all the windows were secured. Grabbing another Coke, he plopped back into his recliner to finish watching a marathon of his favorite show. "Screw that lying, cheating," he muttered to himself. He glanced at his watch. 2 hours to go, and he'd finally be free of the mess for good. At least that's what he hoped. He looked at the ring on his right index finger with the big blue stone and wished for the best. It hadn't always been like this. Randy met Lori while attending college 12 years ago. After completing his Army service, he decided to use his benefits to get a degree in engineering. He met Lori in line at the student union, and they bonded over their mutual tastes in music and movies. They dated, fell in love, and married 2 years after graduating. The first few years were wonderful. They enjoyed a passionate relationship. Randy got a job as a civil engineer at EMX Manufacturing right out of college. Though it was more of a glorified mechanic's position, he was happy to be working, especially with the decent pay and good benefits. Lori struggled to find a position in her field and ended up working part-time for a local accounting firm. As time went on, however, things began to change. They had discussed having children after 5 or 6 years, but Lori suddenly changed her mind. She became more demanding, and Randy, thinking happy wife, happy life, gave in to her demands more often than not. After a while, Lori began micromanaging everything Randy did, telling him how to mow the yard, what television programs to watch, and even how to hold the tools he had used since he was a teenager. Their intimacy began to fade as well. What had been a daily occurrence turned into maybe once or twice a week, then a few times a month. Lori started going out with the girls on Friday nights. At first, Randy didn't mind since he sometimes went bowling or hunting with the guys. Initially, she would leave right after work and return around 7 or 8 that night, always in a good mood. However, as time went on, Lori began coming home later and later, sometimes not returning until the next day. This naturally angered Randy, and the two would spend the weekends fighting. He also noticed that she had started wearing more revealing clothing on those nights. Her skirts, once fashionably short but modest, had become much shorter, and she often wore shorts that left little to the imagination. If that wasn't troubling enough, Randy occasionally thought he detected signs that Lori had been with someone else. On those nights, she would immediately go into the shower and refuse to let him touch her. Changes at the factory added to his stress as well. The economy wasn't doing well, and several maintenance staff were laid off. Randy, being the local master of all trades, was told he would have to work 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, just to keep the plant running. He suggested hiring temporary help, but the plant manager, a burly man who treated employees poorly, shot that idea down. Lori didn't seem to care that Randy was gone so much, and he felt somewhat relieved to be away from her. The overtime was good, even though taxes took a big chunk of his earnings. Nevertheless, he managed to set aside a decent amount just in case. By now, Lori had taken to disparaging him publicly to their friends, claiming he was just a mechanic at a small factory while openly flirting with other men. Her treatment of him grew worse, leading Randy to believe that she might be cheating on him. He considered how he might catch her in the act, but unfortunately, hiring a private investigator or purchasing spy gear was too expensive. One day, while in a stall at work, he overheard a couple of employees discussing a woman who sounded just like Lori. "Did you see the legs on that girl going up to Akers?" One man asked. "Yeah. Do you think she's Akers' new?" The other replied. "Hell yeah. She comes to see him about 3 or 4 times a week. Comes in around 3 o'clock and stays until 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock. Rumor has it she's married to a plant employee. Always comes back looking like she's been out all night." Randy decided to keep an eye out for who this woman was and positioned himself to see anyone going up to Akers' office. It took only a day for his efforts to pay off. Sure enough, he saw Lori walking up the stairs to his office, wearing one of her most revealing outfits. She looked around as if searching for someone before entering. Randy watched as 2 of the plant supervisors entered the office. Akers pulled the shades on the door and put up a sign that read, "Meeting in progress. Do not disturb." 3 hours later, he saw her leave the office, her hair disheveled and makeup smudged. One of the supervisors followed her out, tucking his shirt into his pants. The reality of her infidelity hit Randy hard, and he vowed to seek vengeance. Fed up with her actions and treatment, he seriously considered divorce. He even spoke to a couple of family law attorneys, who informed him that, in his state, he was in a difficult position. He might keep the home he inherited from his parents, but even that wasn't guaranteed. Ultimately, he would lose a significant portion of his income, half of his retirement and possessions, leaving him to struggle while paying for her to pursue her affairs. Because he had no definitive proof of her cheating, he felt powerless. He continued to watch for Lori and spotted her going to Akers' office several more times. He took pictures with his smartphone, but knew they might not hold up in court. Randy decided to confront her about the infidelity, but that backfired. "What were you doing at Akers' office this afternoon?" Randy asked when he got home. "What business is it of yours?" she replied, visibly perturbed. "Are you spying on me now? I couldn't help but see you going into his office, and you certainly weren't dressed for business. If you were with Akers, it's definitely my business. I won't stay married to someone who cheats," he retorted. "I had to deliver some papers to him," she said defensively. "I didn't see any papers, and you sure didn't look like you were dressed for work," Randy replied. "I sometimes have to deliver papers to the plant on my way home from work. You're making too much of this. If you really love me, could you treat me better and quit belittling me in public?" he asked. Lori sighed. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was doing that." Randy put his arms around her. "Want to go upstairs and spend some time together?" She shook her head and broke free of his grasp. "Not tonight. I'm a bit tired." That night, Randy stopped at the Dewdrop Inn, a small bar he liked to visit for a beer or two. The bartender, Ryan, asked, "Everything okay?" "Just lovely," Randy replied. "Woman trouble, huh?" Ryan asked, wiping down the bar. "Yeah, you could say that. My wife is, well, let's just say she's been busy with someone else," Randy admitted. Ryan nodded knowingly and opened a drawer under the till, handing Randy a card. "Give this gal a call." Randy looked at the plain white card. It read, "Dr. Ramja." Under the name was a phone number, but no address was listed. "Who's this?" Randy asked. Ryan put down his towel and leaned closer. "Remember when I was having trouble with Andrea?" Randy suddenly recalled and nodded. "Wasn't she cheating on you?" "Yeah, she was." "Well, this lady took care of it for me." "What do you mean, took care of it?" Randy asked, concerned. "Oh no, nothing like that. Let's just say the cheating won't be cheating on anyone ever again. She helped me deal with the pain of it all. Still does from time to time. And she's very reasonable," Ryan explained, twisting a ring on his finger. "Call her now if you want." "Right now?" Randy asked. "Sure, why not?" "Here, use my phone," Ryan offered, pulling out his cell. Randy had left his in his truck to avoid calls from Lori. He dialed the number, and a woman answered on the first ring. "Dr. Ramja." "Yes, this is Randy." "Pig," she said, finishing his sentence. "I've been expecting your call. Come to my office tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp. Don't be late." Randy was taken aback by her directness. "Where's your office?" "The address is on the card," she replied. Randy checked, and indeed, the address was there beneath the number. "How did that happen? Are you really a doctor?" he asked. "Of course. I have a PhD in multiple disciplines, and I also have the cure for what currently ails you. Be there at 9 a.m. sharp, and bring your phone and your laptop," she instructed before hanging up. Randy was shocked. How did she know who I was? "Did you talk to her? Maybe arrange this?" he asked Ryan. "No, I haven't spoken to her since she helped me with Andrea. Trust me, she's your best shot at dealing with Lori." Randy thanked Ryan, took the card, and headed home. Lori was her usual self, lighting into him as soon as he walked in the door. "Where the hell were you?" she demanded. "Why didn't you answer my calls?" Ignoring her, he went to their bedroom, wondering if she had entertained her lovers in their bed. The thought sickened him. He changed clothes and returned downstairs. "What was that at the plant?" Lori pressed. "Good question. What were you doing there? Please don't tell me you had to pick up papers for your accounting firm. We have an entire department for that. And since when does your company require you to dress like you're competing in a wet t-shirt contest? He shot back. I may have been born at night, but it wasn't last night. How I dress is none of your business, she retorted. 6 days a week, to support someone ungrateful like you, takes its toll, he replied. He went to bed, thinking about the strange call with Dr. Ramja. What kind of name was that? How did she know so much about him? That night, he got far less than his usual 5 hours of sleep and practically had to drag himself out of bed the next day. You look like... Lori started. I'm not surprised. I think I'll go see a doctor today. He picked up his phone and called the plant to inform them he would be gone for an appointment and didn't know how long it would last. Mr. Akers won't be happy, said the bubbly female voice on the other end. Randy recognized it as Angela, a fairly new hire in HR. Yeah, well, if he starts anything, remind him I have over 200 hours of sick time, Randy replied. Angela laughed. You got it, big guy, she said. Lori, you didn't tell me last night you had an appointment. What's wrong? Well, I didn't think you'd care anyway, considering how you've been treating me lately. I just have something that's been making me feel unwell all the time. Thought maybe I could get an antibiotic or something. Randy didn't like lying, but at this point, he really didn't care. Lori played the role of a caring wife, making Randy even more uneasy. Is there anything I can do, baby? She asked. Yeah, Randy thought. Quit messing around and start treating me right. Fat chance of that happening, though. Nah, it doesn't help that I'm working hard, 16 hours a day, to keep a roof over our heads. And it sure doesn't help to see you marching up to Akers' office, dressed like you're on spring break. I have things to do as well. I do have a job, you know, she said. But it doesn't take 3 hours to hand him some papers, does it? Papers I never see you carrying. Come on, Lori. I'm not stupid. Guys are talking. I hear them all the time. What's going on? He asked. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is, he insisted. She looked at the floor. I can't say anything, she said quietly. Well, understand this. I absolutely will not tolerate a cheating wife. You got that? If I ever find out you've been unfaithful to me or anyone else, you're out. Oh, you heard me right. There will be no mercy, no forgiveness. We're done, and whoever is involved will also face consequences. Understand? Randy, please, she began. Shut it. I have to go. My appointment is at 9, and I can't be late. He grabbed his coffee and headed out the door. I love you, Randy, Lori said as he opened the door. He stopped and looked back at her. Yeah, right. Whatever, he replied before leaving. What was that all about? She wondered. Does he know? What will he do? Lori began to get nervous and called Akers. Hey, sweet cheeks, I hear the wimpy guy has a little boo-boo and is going to see the doctor today. Are we on for this afternoon as usual? I have 5 of my supervisors who can't wait to see you. 5 guys, Lori thought. 6 counting Akers. Wow. The thought made her feel a rush of excitement. Yeah. Okay, listen, Ron. I think we may have to cool things down a bit. I think Randy knows what's going on. And he gave me an ultimatum this morning, she said. Don't worry about him. He's too clueless to figure it out. What's he going to do? Run to mommy and pout. Just have that lovely self in my office at 3 like normal, he said. Okay, Lori said quietly. I'll be there. Good, and no undergarments this time. Meanwhile, Randy was making his way to see Dr. Ramja. He found the building listed on the card. It looked like it hadn't been occupied for some time, and weeds were growing up the old brick walls. He drove around back and saw a parking lot with weeds pushing through the cracks in the old pavement. He pulled in and went inside with the bag holding his laptop and tablet, carefully making his way up the creaky old staircase, almost expecting trouble at any moment. He found the door to her suite, simply marked Ram Nua, and went inside. His first reaction was disbelief. A rather attractive young woman with long, wavy blonde hair sat behind a computer hooked up to 3 monitors. The room was filled with old books and files, reminiscent of something out of an old Gothic horror film. She looked up and motioned him inside. "Randy, right on time." "Good. I appreciate punctuality. Please, come in and have a seat." Randy went inside, closed the door, and sat down. "Coffee or tea?" she asked. Coffee is fine. Thank you," he replied. She poured a cup and handed it to him. "Black, just the way you like it," she said, smiling. How in the world did she know that? He wondered. "Please, call me Dr. A. I've been called lots of things over the years. Nemesis, Tyre, just to mention a couple. So Dr. A will work just fine." Who names their kid Nemesis or Tyre? Randy asked himself, but he kept his thoughts to himself as he knew she was there to help him. "Okay, Dr. A, I just want to say thanks for seeing me on such short notice," he said. "My pleasure, Randy. It's my job to help those who seek my assistance. You have a problem with your wife, Lori, right? And you believe she's unfaithful." "Yeah. How do you know all that?" he asked. "It's my job to know, Randy," she said, holding a folder. "Look around you. I have files covering every marriage on earth. Like this poor guy who thinks his wife is visiting her sister in Pachuca. Right now, she's in the middle of a situation in New York." The computer dinged quietly. "Oops, the situation just took a turn. She's going to have a hard time explaining that, especially since her husband had a procedure 3 years ago. There's a divorce waiting to happen. So if you know this, why don't you just step in and stop it?" Randy asked. "Because, Randy, I have a very strict non-intervention policy. I don't get involved unless I'm asked," she explained. "But maybe they don't have your number. I can be reached in other ways. I see you're not a very religious person." "No, I haven't been to church since I was a kid. Too many hypocrites for my taste." She nodded. "I can understand that. There are times, however, when a simple, honest, and heartfelt prayer for help gets across. You'd be amazed. In your case, it was a phone call. So how can you help me?" Randy asked. "Are you a lawyer, a private investigator, a psychologist?" "What? And I certainly can't afford much. I've already looked into lawyers and investigators. I am qualified to do all of those jobs. Simply put, I am justice for the wronged, and no one in my crosshairs escapes. No one. As for cost, you need not worry." "Why?" Randy asked. "Simply put, I already have everything I need, and if I don't have it, I get it. No questions asked. So my services to you will cost nothing in terms of money. You will never see a bill from me, ever. As long as I'm needed on your case, I will be available anytime, day or night. All I ask is that when the time comes, you pay it forward the way Ryan did yesterday," she said. "So how can you keep operating?" Randy asked. "Let's just say I have very deep pockets and leave it at that. Besides, getting justice for those who are wronged is the ultimate satisfaction in my line of work. Look, Randy, you do what you want, but understand that the courts aren't going to work in your favor. You could lose the house you inherited from your parents, as well as nearly everything you've worked so hard to earn. You don't want that. So do we have a deal?" Randy was amazed at what she had just said, but he knew she was right, and he couldn't continue to live the way he had been. He extended his hand. "You got a deal, Dr. A," he said, shaking her hand. They spent the next several hours reviewing his marriage to Lori. Or rather, Randy listened as Dr. A told him about his life with Lori. He learned from her that Lori had been unfaithful to him for the last 2 years. But the worst part began when Ron put him on 16-hour days, which was a setup to make Lori more available to Ron and his friends. Girls' Night Out was just a cover for Lori's questionable activities, often involving multiple partners at the same time. He also learned that Lori had quit her job at the accounting firm to spend more time with her lovers. 6 months ago, she got pregnant during an encounter with Ron and 3 supervisors. Although she had an abortion, complications from the procedure left her unable to have children. Randy remembered a time when Lori seemed extremely ill but refused his help. Overwhelmed by the betrayal, he broke down crying. He had loved her dearly, worked hard for her, and took care of her. This was how she repaid him. Dr. A paused, walked around, and gently took Randy in her arms to comfort him. The moment she touched him, he felt a strange sense of peace wash over him. She kissed him lightly on the cheek and wiped a tear from his face. "It's going to be okay, Randy. I know this is hard, but we have to get through it. When we're done, I promise you'll feel much better." He looked at her and nodded. Who was this woman who could alleviate such deep pain with a simple touch? She sat back down and continued reviewing their marriage. "So Lori meets with Mr. Akers and several of his supervisors at least 3 times a week. They all know she's your wife, by the way, and yes, they're having a good laugh at your expense. They're planning to meet today at the usual time. Oh, and Akers has instructed her not to wear certain undergarments for their afternoon meeting." "What?" Randy exclaimed. "Remember, it's my job," Dr. A said, smiling. Randy vowed he would make them all pay, especially Akers. "At this point, we need to gather evidence, since I'm sure you want some measure of revenge against the men involved with your wife," she asked. "Don't you have everything in your files? Isn't that enough?" "It's enough for me, and my information is absolutely reliable. Unfortunately, it won't hold up in court. Give me your laptop, your smartphone, and your tablet. I'm going to install something, so you can keep a close eye on Lori." Randy watched as she quickly installed software on his devices. Soon, she had the laptop open to the desktop and pointed to an icon for him to open. It prompted for a password, which Dr. A provided. When the application opened, a large window displayed a bird's-eye view of Lori in their bedroom. The audio and video quality was impressive. Lori appeared to be putting her clothes away. Dr. A showed Randy how to maneuver the camera for different angles, even allowing him to zoom in closely. She also demonstrated how to save the video files for later use. The program included a notification box that would alert him to significant events. Randy was amazed. "Where are the cameras?" he asked. "Surely she has to know she's being watched." Dr. A put a finger to her lips. "Trade secret," she said, winking. "And no, she has absolutely no idea she's being monitored. You'll be able to watch and hear everything she says and does, no matter where she is." She pointed to a smaller window below the main screen, clicked a button, and it began filling with a jumble of words. "What's this?" Randy asked. "Something the feds would love to have. It's a special app that tracks her thoughts. Right now, it's synchronizing with her brain patterns. Once it's done, you'll be able to keep track of everything she's thinking. All her plans and desires will be laid bare for you to see." Sure enough, the jumble began to form coherent sentences. "Oh my God, I'm going to be with 6 men today." I'd love to see the look on Randy's face. "I wish to God I never met him. He's so self-righteous. Why couldn't he be like Ron? Oh well, I'll only have to put up with it a little longer. Once Ron sets him up, he'll be well and truly out of the picture. After he's gone, I'll get his house and all that insurance money, and I'll be set for life." "Oh my God," Randy exclaimed. "They're planning to kill me." Dr. A clicked the save button. "Yes, it certainly appears that way," she said. "What do I do? I can't take this to the police. They'd never believe me," Randy said, on the verge of tears. Dr. A hugged him, and he instantly felt better. "Watch the video in the thought feed today. Stay away from her as much as you can tonight. You're off work tomorrow, so come see me at the same time in the morning, and we'll discuss your options, okay?" Randy nodded, wondering what she meant by options and how she managed the surveillance and brain scan. Who was this woman? He had questions but set them aside. After all, she was firmly in his corner, and whatever she did made him feel much better. Remember, she said as he began to leave. "No matter what. I'll be here as long as you need me, anytime, day or night." "Got it," he replied. "Thanks for everything," he added. She smiled. "My pleasure." Randy went home and saw that Lori was already gone. He fired up his laptop to find out what she was up to. It was just a little before 3, and he knew she would be heading to the plant to see Akers. Sure enough, he saw her heading up the stairs to see him. The men in the plant got a good look at her very short skirt as she went up. Damn her, he thought. Damn them all. She paused for a moment to undo several buttons on her blouse before entering Akers' office. He was sitting at his desk with a cigar, and he stopped what he was doing long enough to look her over. "Dan, you look good," he said. "You're a bit early, but that's all right. The others will be here soon enough. Why don't you get comfortable on that couch over there?" Lori walked to the couch, her intentions clear. "Better than Colonel Sanders, huh?" she joked. "I'll take care of it for you next Thursday," he replied. "We have a piece of equipment on the north side that constantly breaks down. The only way to fix it is to crawl inside. But if it's not done right, it could backfire and cause serious harm." Lori responded, "You get a new piece of gear, and I get the house and his insurance." He nodded. "Yeah, and of course my cut of your insurance money. The owners will want to settle with you just to keep it out of court. You could still play the grieving widow and walk away with a few million. Minus my cut, of course." Randy knew the equipment they were discussing was dangerous and should have been replaced a decade ago, but upper management had refused due to cost. Now they would have to deal with much more serious issues. Randy saved that piece of video and continued watching. "Maybe next Wednesday we can invite your husband into our little meeting for one last big send-off. I could tie him up and let him watch," Akers suggested. "What do you think?" he asked. Lori smiled wickedly. "Oh wow. That would be so exciting." Randy wanted to punch his laptop. 5 other supervisors showed up, and Akers put a "Do Not Disturb" sign in place. Randy knew who all the other men were and made sure to capture good shots of their faces. They were all married and often bragged about their conquests. Soon, Randy thought, they would all likely be divorced. "Well, Akers, you were right," one of them said. "P's wife sure is a looker. Can't wait to have my turn." They all laughed. Over the next 3 hours, Randy watched as Lori interacted with each of them multiple times. Some used protection, which only fueled Randy's anger. After a while, he noticed a thought in the box below the video. "Once Randy is out of the picture, I'll be living this way every day." Suddenly, a notification box lit up on the display. Randy moved his mouse over it. "STD alert," the pop-up said. Randy was stunned. Lori didn't know this, and neither did the men she was with. They continued their activities for another 2 hours, and by now, all 6 men were likely exposed. Randy grabbed his phone and called Dr. A. She answered on the first ring. "She just got infected with gonorrhea. Did you see what Akers and Lori planned to do to me?" "Yes, I know. I saw that too. Don't touch her tonight. Whatever you do, I'll take care of the others." "What do I do? Should I send the video to the police?" Randy asked. "At the very least, this is conspiracy to commit murder. What you need to do is relax and trust me. No one escapes my justice. I'll see you tomorrow." With that, Randy hung up. He noticed that Lori had left Ron's office and was heading to her car. He watched the thought scanner to see what was on her mind. "I can't wait to be with Randy after being with all those men. He'll be out of the picture next Thursday anyway." At that moment, Randy felt more hatred toward her than he ever had for anyone in his life. He closed down his laptop, nuked a pot pie, and turned on the TV. Soon, he heard her car pull into the driveway. She entered the house and walked right past him, a scent of someone else lingering on her. He said nothing. Right now, he felt as though he could happily put an end to everything. "I'm home," she announced. Randy stared at the TV, trying to ignore her. I said I'm home, she repeated, louder this time. Still silent, Randy moved his head to focus on the screen. Screw this, she huffed, storming off. A couple of hours later, she yelled, Are you coming to bed? Not if you're in it, he replied. Damn it, Randy. What's wrong with you? She asked, her tone a mix of annoyance and concern. By the way, you never even asked how my appointment went. But then again, I'm not surprised, since you really don't care about me. I'm sorry, baby, that's not true. What did the doctor say? I have to go back first thing in the morning for a follow-up to determine how to get rid of what's making me sick. What's making you sick? Did the doctor say? A couple of things, he replied, looking right at her. Naturally, she didn't catch the hint. But honestly, I'm not sleeping with you tonight. I'll sleep in the den. You smell bad, and I don't want to risk anything. Okay, she said quietly, turning back to the bedroom. Randy waited until he heard the door close, then pulled out his phone and opened the monitoring app Dr. A had installed earlier. He was curious to see what she was thinking. Oh my God. Does he know? What will he do? What will Ron do? I don't know if I can do this anymore. My husband hates me, but I hate him too. After all, that's why I approached Ron about getting rid of him. I thought that working all those hours would wear him down or give him a heart attack, but it didn't. Maybe Randy knows more than he's letting on. His eyes were so full of hate for me. That's not the Randy I know. What have I done? Randy smiled, knowing that whatever conscience she had left was starting to eat at her. Tired, he went into the den, lay down on the futon, and fell asleep. The next morning, Randy got up, showered, dressed, and grabbed some coffee before walking out the door. He said nothing to Lori, and offered no display of affection. Can I go with you to the doctor? She asked. Randy shook his head. No, I don't know when I'll be finished, and I'm sure you have other things to do. Oh, Randy, you know I do love you. You have a funny way of showing it, he replied. Do you still love me? She asked. Randy considered his answer. Honestly, Lori, I don't know. A part of me does, and probably always will. But truthfully, a part of me hates you with a red-hot passion right now. I think you know why. I always loved the girl I married, but right now she's gone, and I don't know what you did to her. I got to go. I'll be back when I'm back. Okay, I'll see you when you get back, Lori said. Randy left, confused by their last exchange. Was she having doubts? Would she finally come to her senses? He doubted it. Even if she did, there was no way he could ever trust her again. He arrived at Dr. A's office and went inside right on time. Again, she said, smiling. Have a seat while I get your coffee. Randy accepted her coffee and watched as she glided back to her chair. He found himself wanting to know this woman better. She wasted no time getting to the point. They talked for some time about Lori and the plot against him. Well, I take it last night opened your eyes, she said. Yeah, I never knew just how bad things were with Lori. There's no question. Divorce is the only answer, he replied. Dr. A looked at him carefully and drew a piece of chalk from her desk drawer. You're limiting yourself, Randy. Surely there's something much better. Let me explain. She got up and walked around the desk, standing in front of Randy. She drew a circle on her desk with the chalk and filled it in. We're going to play pretend here, okay? Okay, Randy said. Let's pretend this is a button. A very special button. Lori could disappear, transported anywhere you wanted. Do you think you could press it? She asked. Randy looked at the circle before meeting her gaze. Anywhere? He inquired. Absolutely. And it doesn't even have to be a real place, she replied. But wouldn't her absence go unnoticed? Wouldn't people start looking for her? Randy asked. Dr. A smiled. Not if she never existed here. Sure, you'd remember her. And maybe others close to you might have a distant memory. But there would be no record, no trace, no pictures, nothing to prove she was ever here. What now? She pressed. Randy considered her words as he looked at the circle. Could he really do it? All he would have to do is press the button, and poof. No more Lori. No more taunts. No more betrayal. No more lies. No more conspiracies against him. He reached out and placed his thumb on the circle. Hell yes, he said. Dr. A hugged him and planted a soft kiss on his cheek. Good man, she said, returning to her desk and pulling out a ring with a curious blue stone that resembled one he had seen before. Place this on your right index finger. The chalk circle I drew on the desk was just a game. This is the real thing. Randy looked at the ring and then back at her. But where will I send her? He asked. I have an idea you might find interesting, she replied. Isn't tonight the weekly Twilight Zone marathon? Yes, it is, he confirmed, pleased that it was something he always looked forward to, especially since Lori hated it. It always has been. Don't tell anyone, but it's one of mine as well. Rod Serling tells some wonderful tales, and I just love the brilliant sense of irony and justice in many of those old programs. In fact, I believe one of your personal favorites will be playing tonight at 9. Which one? He asked, intrigued. Spoilers. You'll know it when you see it, she teased. Do you trust me? She asked. Sure, Randy replied. Good. I'll set the ring to activate at 9:15, giving you 15 minutes to press the blue stone. Understand that once it's done, it can't ever be undone, and the ring loses all its power at 9:30. Okay, let's do it, Randy said, excitement and apprehension mixing in his chest. Dr. A smiled broadly. Wonderful. Consider it done. Keep your laptop application running, and you'll know instantly if you're successful. What about the other troublemakers? Randy asked. They'll be taken care of tonight as well. Don't worry. Check your local 8 o'clock news. I think you'll find it interesting, she said. They talked a bit more about life, love, and justice before Randy grew quiet. Dr. A, will I ever see you again? He asked. You know you can always reach me if you ever need me, she said. I'm just sorry it's just that. Well, I like talking to you. I feel better, more alive, and more cared for than I have in such a long time, he admitted. Falling for me, aren't you, Randy? She asked. It's okay and perfectly normal under the circumstances. Maybe a little, he confessed. It's been so long since I felt comfortable with a pretty woman. She came around the desk, sat on his lap, and put her arms around him. Randy, you're a good man. Decent, honest, hardworking, and loving. I know many women who would love to be with you, and I'm certain one of them will before you even know it. Under other circumstances, I'd be honored to call you mine. But know this, Randy, I'll always be with you everywhere you go. She placed her hands on either side of his face and gave him a gentle kiss on the lips. He felt a rush of emotion, something he couldn't quite explain but understood in a way that felt profound. Randy, she said, placing her hand over his heart, I'll always be right here, and I'll always love you unconditionally. Maybe not in the way you have in mind, but perhaps on some lonely night in a dream, we might meet again, and you can always talk to me here. She tapped his head lightly. Randy looked at her, feeling the love he couldn't put into words but somehow understood. He nodded. Thank you, he said. She got off his lap and led him to the door, handing him a pile of blank white cards. Don't forget to pay it forward. I won't. Thank you for everything, he replied. Randy made it back to his truck and realized he had spent most of the day with her. He stopped for a burger and a beer before heading home. For the first time in many months, he felt a sense of happiness and even paused to observe some birds gathering in the trees. After spending some quality time communing with nature, he headed home. This will be it, he told himself. He arrived just in time for the first Twilight Zone episode of the evening, grabbed a Coke instead of a beer, and settled in. Lori was back to her usual self as she prepared for her girls' night out. Well, I see you finally decided to come home. How did it go with the doctor? She asked. Great, Randy said. "So did the doctor figure out how to cure whatever it is that's making you so sick?" she asked. "As a matter of fact, yes, and I should be feeling much better by the end of the evening," he replied. "So what did you do for the rest of the day?" "You were gone an awful long time," she shot back. "I went and grabbed a burger and a beer and just spent some time enjoying nature. It's amazing what we take for granted, you know," he said. "Whatever," she replied sarcastically, retreating to the bedroom. Randy ignored her and immersed himself in the week's marathon. Soon enough, she was gone, and he considered the ring on his finger. He checked the time. 7:59 p.m. Turning on the local news, he was shocked by what he saw. Tonight on Eyewitness News, the anchor said, "A mysterious explosion at EMX Manufacturing has resulted in the deaths of 6 men, including plant manager Ron Akers. The others are believed to be supervisors, but their names have not been released pending notification of next of kin. It's not known what caused the explosion, but authorities suspect it's related to aging equipment that mysteriously activated. The plant, operational since the 1950s, has a long history of safety issues, and OSHA has closed the facility until a full investigation is complete." Workers have reported seeing an unidentified woman meeting with Akers several times a week for months. Some believe this woman may have had inappropriate involvement with Akers and others. It's unknown if she's connected to tonight's explosion, but authorities haven't ruled it out. Additionally, police have received a video showing Akers allegedly discussing a plot to harm an employee using the very equipment involved in tonight's incident. The source of the video remains a mystery, but authorities are investigating. Stay tuned for further developments in this strange tale. "Wow," Randy thought to himself. "Adressa, you did it," he said to the empty room. "I'm just fine, thank you," he heard in his mind. Turning back to the marathon, he thought, screw Akers and the others. They got what they deserved. He knew he'd be answering many questions in a few days, but tonight he would celebrate.